The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening for our virtual Minton Road Feasibility Study public meeting. I am Sarah Crom, the Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization Project Manager for the study. The Space Coast TPO continually monitors the conditions of Brevard's transportation systems, modes, and carries out planning at the regional level. We work to identify opportunities to improve mobility for the people and businesses who use transportation systems. Several years ago, the City of West Melbourne submitted the request for the Space Coast TPO to evaluate Minton Road within the city limits, specifically considering bicycle and pedestrian needs and facilities and whether or not the road needed to be widened. We began the project in May 2019 as part of the project. We began the project in May 2019. As part of the project, we wanted to engage and discuss the project with citizens and stakeholders. Originally, we had planned a face-to-face public workshop, but due to the global pandemic, have attempted to create a virtual experience to simulate the planned workshop through tonight's presentation and a virtual project guide website. We are so happy that you have chosen to join us in this endeavor. We do have a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Today's meeting will be recorded. For those unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar platform, in order to reduce background noise, attendees are in listen-only mode. Time permitting, we will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. The GoToWebinar control panel should be located in your upper right-hand corner. You are welcome to utilize the question box on the control panel at any time during the presentation. If you're watching on Facebook, please feel free to ask any questions by comments. On the control panel, under Handouts, you can also find a project fact sheet that includes this evening's agenda, project information, and directions regarding the virtual project guide website. For our final housekeeping item, we will be utilizing a survey tool to gather some basic information. Using a computer tablet or cellular device, please go to menti.com and enter the code 2412774. That's Menti, MENTI.com, and enter the code 2412774. Give everyone a couple minutes to get signed into Menti. The first question that should show once you're signed in is, please sign in to the meeting by entering your zip code. So whatever your zip code might be. We're just going to give a couple minutes for everyone to get Menti set up and get signed in. So that's meant for those that are just logging in. You can use a computer, tablet, or cellular device. Go to menti.com, put in 2412774, and enter your zip code to sign into today's meeting. All right. We just have a couple more questions that we wanted to get feedback on for logging in. How have you ever attended a Space Coast TPO event or public meeting before? So simple yes or no. We are not showing. Uh-oh. There we go. All right. And our next one, how did you hear about tonight's public meeting? Email, newsletter, word of mouth, Facebook, Nextdoor, Twitter, TPO website, other. I believe you can click multiple options. I'm just going to give just a couple more minutes. All right. And our last one for now, we do have a couple more towards the end of the presentation. What modes of transportation do you use on Minton Road? Please choose all that apply. So do you usually drive your personal vehicle? Do you walk, bike, ride the bus? Or maybe you're just a citizen that decided to tune in tonight. You don't normally walk or bike or ride. All right. So thank you for providing that input and for answering those questions. I am now going to send it over. I would like to introduce Travis Hills, and he is going to take us through our presentation.
All right, perfect. So looks like video's working. Let's make sure clicker is working. Perfect. All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Travis Hills. I'm with Kittleson and Associates. We're the consultant working with the TPO on this project. So what I'm going to do is I have about 40 slides that I'm hopefully going to go through here pretty quick to really provide an overview of what we've been doing so far. We've been at this for a while now, so we wanted to get with you all, review the alternatives that we're looking at before we move into the next phase of the project. So once again, welcome. This is our overview of a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today. This is also found on the project website, or the virtual project guide, which we'll be talking about later in the presentation. But while you're here to participate, learn about the feasibility study process, review the different alternatives that we're proposing along Minton Road. Really, we want you all to help shape the future of this corridor. We don't do these studies in a silo. We don't do them on our own. And so we reach out to the public, really want to get your input because you all are the ones that live, work, drive, bike, walk, take transit along this corridor every day. So we want to hear from you all firsthand. You'll see we have some contact information for Sarah, who you just heard from, different ways to get involved. Definitely get on the project website once we're done. Go through all the information that we have there. We have a lot of information on the website, so we want to share that with you and reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns. Definitely at the end of that, fill out a feedback survey with your input on the project. We're going to take that, use that in the next phases and as we progress into our what we call preferred alternative development. So kind of where we're at in the spectrum of what we call transportation planning. So it's a little graphic in the lower right, the upside down triangle. So long range planning efforts for folks that are familiar with the long range transportation plan, we're in the process of wrapping that up. That's going to be going for adoption here in September. We're one level down from that in the planning process. And so this Minton Road feasibility study, those efforts are identified in our long range planning efforts. They identify, we say, hey, okay, we want to go out and take a look at a specific corridor. We want to come up with a plan for the future of that corridor. And then from here, hopefully it moves on to future phases which could be design, right of way, may need to purchase property if necessary, and then on to construction. So hopefully we're moving towards that once we get past and out of this study. Like I mentioned, we've been at this for a while. So we started this project back in early 2019. We're slated to wrap this up in early kind of springtime of 2021. COVID has impacted our schedule a little bit. We've been trying to figure out, how we can reach out to you all virtually. And fortunately, we've been able to put this together tonight. So like I mentioned, a little bit on our agenda, we're going to talk through the goals of the project. We're going to talk through existing conditions. So what are we seeing out there today? Really helped us shape the issues and opportunities that we used, or we identified those issues and opportunities to help us identify which roadway alternatives and intersection improvements we wanted to potentially look at. Like I mentioned at the end, Sarah's going to go through our virtual project guide. And so we'll go through that towards the end of the project. So project goals, I guess first we'll talk about the study corridor specifically. So Minton Road, we started down at Palm Bay Road. That's our southern study intersection. And so we starting at Palm Bay Road, we go up the study corridor, cross over I-95, and then we end at US 192. So relatively long stretch of Minton Road. We're looking at multiple intersections, and we'll talk about all the different alternatives that we have at those here later in the presentation. So the goals of the project, the first one kind of right off the bat was there was a potential need to widen the road from 4 to 6 lanes. And so there had been right of way or there was property set aside to be able to widen the road from 4 to 6 lanes if traffic volumes were high enough where it was needed. We went through the process with our local agencies, City of West Melbourne, Brevard County, Space Coast Area Transit, Palm Bay, and we sat down with everybody and said, okay, what does the future of this corridor, what do we want the future of this corridor to look like? Through that process, we determined that widening to 6 lanes isn't necessarily the direction that we wanted to go. Typically, your 6-lane roads, they're going to be higher speed. They're less pet bike friendly. They've been shown to have higher crash rates than other, maybe 4-lane facilities. And so there was a consensus from that group that we were not going to explore widening alternatives at this time. We were going to really focus on pet bike enhancements along the corridor, improving safety for pets, bikes, and vehicles, and also hoping to reduce congestion along the corridor. We know that there are some hot spots, and so we're going to do some intersection improvements to help facilitate that as well. Like I said, that feeds into the second bullet. And then, the last part, last but certainly not least, is definitely enhancing those multimodal facilities throughout the corridor, so pedestrians, bicycles, and transit. So now a little bit on the existing conditions. And so the first part of what we do in any planning study is we look at operations. So how effectively or how efficiently do vehicles travel along the corridor? And what we look at is typically it's an A to F scale. So it's like you're back in school, right? So A is good, F is bad. What we were seeing is that there were a few intersections where we had failing operations or level of service F. A few intersections, Norfolk Parkway and Carriage Gate. Those were one of our hot spots. And then we also had some segments where we were having some of those same issues as well, where you're seeing pretty consistent, stacking of vehicles. You're sitting at a light for maybe a little bit longer than you really want to. And so these are all things that we've identified and then verified back when we went out in the field as well to really take a look at those existing conditions. We'll talk a little bit more about those issues here in a few slides. So a little bit on crash history as well. So beyond the operations, we also look at safety data. We've had a little bit over 1,000 crashes. We looked at 5 years of data from 2014 to 2018. Now you may be wondering, how is that significant, or is it significant? Is it not significant? Generally from what we've seen, the amount of crashes that have happened along this stretch of Minton Road are a little bit higher than what we would typically see for a similar type of roadway. This is also ranked 19th on our what we call state of the system report in terms of crashes at the segment level. So we are seeing, and that's 19th, top 19, I guess, in the county. And so definitely some safety issues that we want to try to address through this planning study and through the alternatives that we're going to move forward with. One of the big things to note is that a lot of these crashes are happening during the PM, what we call the PM peak hour. So 5 to 6 p.m., people are getting off work. We had about 10% of our crashes occur during that 1 hour time period throughout the 5 years of crash data. And then a little bit on locations as well. So these are some of our hot spots. So as you would imagine, some of our bigger intersections show up. Palm Bay Road, we had about 260 crashes at that location. US 192 at the north end of the corridor was our highest crash location with over 300 crashes over those 5 years. Then we have a few spot locations, Heald, Helen Street, both close to 30 crashes. And then really in the middle of the corridor, Milwaukee and Henry, those are two of our kind of highest locations with 46 and 81 crashes respectively. So in addition to vehicular crashes, we also want to take a look at pedestrian and bicycle crashes and see if there are any specific areas or locations that we need to address from a pet bike crash standpoint. Overall, we had 5 pedestrian and 10 bicycle crashes along the corridor. The big one, the big statistic that jumps out is that we had 9 of those occur within crosswalks. So these are folks that are either using the crosswalk on their bike or they're walking and they're getting hit by a vehicle. And whether who's at fault, we didn't really get into all that level of detail, but all we do know is that, those crosswalks are supposed to be protected and safe spaces for pedestrians and bicyclists, and that's where we're having most of our crash issues. We looked along the entire corridor, the Milwaukee Avenue, Heritage Oaks Boulevard location, that signal was our highest crash location from a pet bike standpoint. So we had 5 total crashes there. When we went out and did field reviews, it was also echoed by the crossing guards at that location that, it's a very unsafe location, perceived unsafe location for pedestrians that are using that intersection. The crossing guards, I think one of them almost got struck by a vehicle that was turning left out of one of the side streets when we were out there observing it. And then you have a lot of kids interacting at that location as well. So it'll be one of the locations that we emphasize moving forward here, discuss later in the presentation. So now, once we've gone through and done our existing conditions analysis, we identify issues and opportunities. And like I said, this springboards us into what alternatives we want to look at along the entire corridor. So starting with multimodal, which is pedestrian, bicycles, transit, we have the what we call pedestrian mobility emphasis intersections. And this also turns into mobility slash safety is what I like to call it. And so every location, every signalized location along the corridor is going to be an emphasis for pedestrian safety and mobility, something we're going to be taking a look at as we progress further on the project. Transit stop enhancements as well. So there's transit stops along the whole corridor. West Melbourne does a great job of upkeeping those, putting out shelters. So we want to enhance those for whatever what we call roadway alternative that we want to implement along the corridor. Like I said, I've mentioned before, pedestrian facility and bicycle facility enhancements as well. Those are things that we're also going to be taking a look at and talking about here in a few slides. So some other issues and opportunities, we do have some spot locations where we want to look at operational enhancements, and so we've identified those. And then we have safety emphasis intersections. So these are intersections with 50 or more crashes, Palm Bay, Eber, Henry, and US 192, all ones that we want to emphasize moving forward in our alternatives development. And then we think there's an opportunity for lighting as well. There's a few sections along the corridor that have recent lighting installments. They look really nice. They're really well lit. You're very visible at night. And then there's other spots where it is completely pitch black and you can't see anything. And so we're hoping to implement lighting along the corridor as well. And then on the vehicular side, like I had mentioned, the queuing or that congestion, the stacking where you're waiting at a signal, we saw a lot of that when we were out there. And in the AM, when you're going northbound, pretty much from the I-95 bridge, the bridge over 95 up to Wingate, that was really one of your big problem areas there with the school and the interaction with the school kids and the crossings that are going on there at the intersection. And then in the PM, it's the opposite. So you're going southbound, and it really all backs up from Palm Bay Road. That's what we were seeing in the PM. And then we also had some issues along Henry as well. Folks were struggling to get out in the afternoon, going westbound to get out onto Minton Road. A couple other things that we want to take a look at are utilities and drainage facilities. Those are really going to play a factor into what roadway alternative, like I said, we'll discuss that here in a few slides, what roadway alternative that we implement along the study corridor. So like I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about roadway alternatives. Before I get into the actual alternatives, we need to explain what's out there today. So you all, if you drive this, walk this, bike this regularly, this should be pretty familiar to you, but you have 2 lanes in each direction, 2 going northbound, 2 going southbound. You have that, what we call a raised median. You have curb and gutter on the inside. So that's that 2 feet curb and gutter that you see there on the inside median. And then once you go to the outside, you have a 4-foot paved shoulder that then goes down into what we call a swale. And this is where all of your roadway water, when it rains, it drains off into this swale and then goes into drainage facilities that are along the corridor. And then outside of those swales, you have sidewalks, 5 feet, about 5 feet wide in most locations along most of the corridor. So what do we want to change? So we have 4 different alternatives that I'll walk you through. And like I said, we'll go through the website here towards the end. You can actually get on the website and vote for what alternative you like the best or what you want to see implemented. So these are kind of critical slides that I'm going to walk through here. So alternative number 1, buffered bike lanes. So this is probably going to be the least impactful or the least costly alternative of the 4. We'll kind of build up to the most costly here at the end, but really the easiest improvement to make is to take that paved shoulder, make it a little bit wider. You're paving into the swale a little bit more, and then you're putting in what we call a buffer bike lane. And that's just a bike lane. It's probably 5 or 6 feet wide. And then you have a striped out area in between the bike lane and the outside travel lane, provides a little bit of protection for that bicyclist. As part of this alternative, we would also be widening the sidewalks to 8 feet from the 5 feet that it is today. So alternative 2 would be shared use paths. And what this is you'll see to the outside, we've widened the sidewalk from 5 feet to 12 feet. This provides enough space to accommodate both pedestrians and bicyclists outside of the roadway. And so we know that with the travel speeds out there, folks are it's posted at 45, people are driving probably a little bit faster. We want to make sure that we provide a comfortable environment for bicyclists. And so we're pulling them off the road, keeping them separated from the travel, from the vehicles on the roadway, providing that safer space for them to the outside. Another variant on that, what we call alternative 3A, is protected bicycle lanes. And so what this does and why this is a little bit different than the shared use path is this actually provides a paved surface for bicyclists to travel at faster speeds. So when you're on a shared use path, it's concrete. You may not be able to ride as fast as you would want to or as fast as you could in the roadway on asphalt. What this does is it provides that 5-foot paved surface for the bicycle facility to the outside. You're on the other side of the swale, so you're still removed from the travel way. And then you would have a separation or a buffer between you or as the cyclist and the pedestrian facility, the sidewalk, which would widen to 6 feet on the outside. And then because there was a 3A, there has to be a 3B, and this would be the cycle track alternative. And so what this would do is, as you'll see on the right-hand side, we have what we call a cycle track. And this is a 2-way bicycle facility that's on one side of the road. It has enhanced bicycle features so that when you approach intersections or driveways, either you as the bicyclist would know, okay, we have a cycle track here, I need to yield to vehicles, or vice versa, where if you're at a driveway, the vehicles know that they're approaching a cycle track and they need to yield to the bicyclists. And so one interesting thing with this concept is that we would shift this on either the west or the east side of the road, depending on where we're at along the corridor. And so we were thinking about implementing this alternative just north of the I-95 bridge at Eber Boulevard. It would be on the west side, potentially connecting to some new kind of town center properties that may be developed on the west side of the road. There's some vacant parcels there, and kind of the Field of Dreams, the parks that are on the west side. So you'd have that cycle track on the west side from Eber up to about Wingate. And then at Wingate, you would cross that over to the east side of the road and go in front of the schools along Minton Road, and you would take it from Wingate up to Milwaukee. And what we were seeing is you would like to do that to connect the different land uses that you have along the corridor on the west and east sides in those different sections. The other thing we were seeing is where the students come from when they're coming to and from school. And so we were seeing a lot of kids coming from the west side of the road south of Wingate, and they were coming from the east side of the road north of Wingate. So if you have that cycle track on both sides, on the west side south, on the east side to the north, you facilitate those bicycle movements for those kids that are coming to and from school, which from what we saw, there were quite a few that were bicycling to and from school. As a part of this alternative, I don't want to forget that we're also going to widen the sidewalks to 8 feet as well. So like I'd mentioned, for folks that may not know what a cycle track is, or this is their first time hearing about it, it is a physically separated facility from both motor traffic, and it is separated from the pedestrian, the sidewalk as well. And it is distinct from a sidewalk. So you'll see from some of these pictures here, you have that asphalt kind of surface for the bikes. You do have striping for the bicycles, and it is separated from that sidewalk pedestrian facility. And so one thing that we like to do with these alternatives is review them qualitatively with a measures of effectiveness, or MOE matrix. What we're seeing here is that all of the pedestrian, bicycle, and transit access is relatively high. It's moderate to high for all of the alternatives that we're looking at. We're really trying to emphasize the pedestrian and bicycle safety, the pedestrian and bicycle movements, and that access to transit. So it's high across the board for those. Where you get into some things that we're going to have to be thinking about, I don't necessarily want to call them issues, but things we're going to be thinking about as we move forward is, we may need to purchase property at the intersections. And so we'll talk about that here in a few slides on where those locations may be. The drainage impacts are going to be pretty high. For each of these, because you're going from kind of that open swale to now you have to figure out what you're doing with the water. Do you put in curb and gutter to help, kind of close the roadway in, what we like to say. But there's going to be some drainage impacts with the different alternatives that we're looking at. Utility impacts probably pretty low. Those are all outside of the sidewalk, and we're doing all of our improvements within the sidewalk. And then, like I mentioned, we typically present alternatives from low cost to high cost. So those buffered bike lanes, alternative 1, relatively low cost. You go add some pavement, all the way up to your cycle track or your protected bike lanes, which are alternatives 3A and 3B, which are going to be more costly improvements. So like I've mentioned before, we'll talk through some of our intersection alternatives. So transitioning from kind of generally along what we want to do along the roadway to our intersections. So Palm Bay Road, this is our first study intersection on the south side of the corridor. What we realized as we got into this is that this intersection is a lot more complex than kind of what our study was intended to look at. So as people who drive this area know, and I've driven this intersection quite a bit, you're coming off I-95, you're taking that left to go south onto Minton, and then you're probably taking the right to go down Emerson. This whole area, you can't just look at this intersection and try to improve this intersection without looking at kind of that segment of Minton Road from Palm Bay down to Emerson, looking at the Emerson intersection as well as kind of one system. And so what we're going to do is there are some safety improvements that we're going to recommend and hopefully going to implement at this intersection. Came out of a road safety audit that was done about 4 or 5 years ago. But in addition to that, we're going to recommend additional studies. So I know that people don't like doing a study to recommend another study, but we think there needs to be a more comprehensive approach to looking at how this intersection operates within kind of the area of kind of the Emerson Drive, Minton Road kind of segment and intersection. So we're going to recommend a little bit follow up on that to do a more detailed analysis on that area. So moving up the corridor to Heald. So this intersection, it operates pretty well. Like I said, A is good, F is bad. So this is level of service A when we're looking out, 20 years in the future with higher volumes. So you're in pretty good shape. There was a request by our local agencies to look at adding a new left turn lane for this eastbound, what we call the eastbound approach. So we've drawn that up here. You'll see that on the screen that we've drawn that in. We don't anticipate any right-of-way needed, which is great. So we'll be able to fit this within the right-of-way, pretty minimal impacts overall. Like I said, it does actually enhance the intersection as well. So we'll hopefully be looking to get this incorporated. So moving up to Norfolk, so this intersection is one of those where this is potentially a very big intersection. It's going to be a big location. There's going to be a lot of traffic volume potentially going through this intersection in the future. There's a lot of development that's going on out to the west. And so to account for all of that kind of future volume, we're going to be adding, or we're going to be looking to add a second eastbound left turn lane. And so you'll see everything in orange, that's essentially new pavement. And so we'd be shifting the road down to help line up those lanes a little bit better. And then as you approach the intersection, you have that second eastbound left that would then help you go north onto Minton. And as you'll see, it actually improves our operations at the intersection pretty significantly. So Carriage Gate, this is an interesting location. It's a tough intersection, being right kind of at the bottom of the I-95 bridge. It's a location that we don't have anything really drawn up for yet, or we don't have a concept developed for yet. But we are going to be looking at safety and access management improvements. We're going to be doing that as part of the next part of our study. So you'll be seeing more on that here at our next public meeting early next year. So Burdock and Eber, so we are looking at adding another westbound left turn lane, so a second westbound left turn lane at this intersection. So that was identified as one of our critical movements at this location. It is a little bit tricky. You do have those pretty significant 90-degree bends in the roadway. You also have some drainage facilities that we had to watch out for as well. But what we were hoping to do is add that second westbound left turn lane, and then we would go through and add a 2-foot raised median between the left turn lane and the opposing kind of eastbound through lane. And what that would do, that would kind of help reroute some traffic, help improve safety, specifically for that driveway to the 7-Eleven that you see there. Right now, folks are making a left turn either to or from the 7-Eleven across the left turn lanes that are there today. You have some issues with sight distance because you're coming around a curve. And so we want to try to help clean up that access, make it a little bit safer for folks that are going in and out of the gas station from Eber. And so what does that mean for access? And so we want to be taking a look at how we're impacting folks getting to and from their property, or folks that may be going to and from the property. And so as you'll see, entering the 7-Eleven, really, it doesn't change a whole lot. So instead of using potentially the driveway that's down on Eber, folks would then just really have to use Minton to take the driveway that is located on Minton just north of the intersection. Where it does play a little bit of a factor are the folks that are currently making the left out from the 7-Eleven to go east or to go south on Eber, so going away from Minton Road. So folks that can kind of take a left, cut across those couple turn lanes to then go south on Eber. That median would restrict that access. Right now, we're showing a pretty conservative approach where folks would have to, come out of the driveway on Minton Road, go up, make the U-turn at the next location, up at the next directional median opening, and then U-turn, have to come back, left turn at the intersection to go down Eber. Like I said, that's a pretty conservative approach. We're going to look at some alternatives to help shorten that impact so that folks aren't having to drive 10 minutes out of their way to go to the 7-Eleven if they're going back down Eber Boulevard. So moving up the road to Flanagan and Wingate. So these two intersections were actually operating pretty well. Like I said, the major issue at Wingate in the morning, and the reason for all the congestion is because of the school. And really what's going on is those kids are coming up. You're getting a pedestrian, what we call a pedestrian cycle, where a pedestrian is using the crosswalk across Minton. Pretty much every single red light that you see, there's going to be pedestrians crossing there, which is increasing the time to make it through that intersection. What we were seeing is that from kind of a turn lane standpoint, adding left turn lanes or doing some different things like that, we weren't really seeing much benefit to be able to implement those types of recommendations. So instead, what we're going to do is focus on pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements at these locations. And really enhancing it from a ped bike standpoint. And so hopefully with all of the other kind of improvements that we're making along the corridor, it'll help enhance vehicle operations. And then at this location, we're really going to target that ped bike safety. So then moving up to Milwaukee. So this is a little bit of an interesting concept, one that probably most folks haven't seen before. So what this is this is what we call a restricted crossing U-turn intersection. And so if you come or if you drive through this intersection coming from Milwaukee or Heritage Oaks Boulevard, you'll see that as the current concept shows, you won't be able to make a left turn out of those side streets. Or you won't be able to travel straight through the intersection to go across Minton Road. So what this does is this provides a much safer intersection for all three types of users. So for vehicles, it's much safer. And then for pedestrians and bicyclists, it's also safer. So like I mentioned, as you'll remember, this was our highest ped bike crash location along the entire corridor. And so while we want to emphasize ped bike safety, we also want to help vehicle operations. And so you'll see that with this configuration, we do enhance those vehicle operations. We help out that ped bike safety. Overall, it's a better concept for the intersection and for the location. The one thing that you'll see, so when you make those right turns out, you'll go down to where those little orange lines are for that turn lane, both north and south of the intersection. And then you'll make a U-turn to go back down south or to go back north. Essentially, instead of making a left, you make a right and then a U-turn to get to your destination. And so those locations would be signalized. So you wouldn't be trying to make a U-turn when you have all those vehicles on Minton Road coming, opposing you. So fortunately, you'd be able to get out, make the U-turn pretty effectively, pretty efficiently, and it's a much safer movement overall for the vehicles. And just to illustrate that viewpoint, I have an animation. And so you'll see that, like I mentioned, that went pretty quick, so I'll do it again. So if you're coming up from the bottom part of the screen, you're making that right-hand turn, you'll see you go into the U-turn lane and you make the U-turn and then you go back through the intersection. You could still make the right turn onto the side street and you could still make that left turn as well.
Can you show it just one more time?
Yep, I will show it one more time. Like I said, it goes pretty quick, but there's your U-turn. You can make the right and you can make the left. And so overall, it definitely increases your operational efficiency. Your vehicles move through the intersection a little bit faster, a little bit easier because you're not being conflicted with everything that's coming on from the side streets. And then, like I mentioned, you're limiting the amount of conflict points, which makes it so your intersection is much safer as well. And then a little bit on the pedestrian and bicycle movements, like I mentioned, it is safer. And the reason why it's safer, so we were having issues with folks making left turns out of Milwaukee Avenue and Heritage Oaks Boulevard, and they were, either near misses or they were hitting pedestrians that were in those crosswalks that were crossing Minton Road. So as you'll see, you essentially eliminate that conflict with this alternative. So now you don't have those vehicles making a left turn out. You don't have that interaction with the pedestrians and bicyclists. And now they're able to make it across Minton Road in one movement. You'll see in the middle, you have that kind of diagonal crosswalk striping. So they'll be able to make that movement. They won't have any interaction with any vehicles. And really, it just helps the whole kind of environment for pedestrians and bicyclists. The other nice thing is that for the U-turn locations to the north and to the south, those little orange areas, those also include pedestrian crosswalks as well. And so we'd be adding more opportunities for pedestrians to cross Minton Road. It would be signalized, so it would be protected, which would provide that safe crossing as well. All right, and our last major intersection where we're looking to make improvements is Henry Avenue. And so, as I mentioned before, the westbound was an issue in the afternoon peak hour. And so what we're hoping is that we can add a second westbound left turn lane, help facilitate those movements. We would also provide some access management improvements for the USPS driveways that we have as well. And so you'll see in the graphic, it's a little bit hard to see because the blue line goes on top of it, but there is going to be a raised median as a part of this concept, or there would be. And it would close access to that first driveway for folks that are coming along Henry from the east. So if you're coming westbound along Henry trying to make the left in, you wouldn't be able to do that for that first, or for that, like a second USPS driveway. And so we'll show some similar graphics like we did down in Eber, showing the entering and exiting the post office. And so, like I mentioned, entering, it really won't be much different except for those folks that are coming from the east along Henry. So instead of being able to turn left into the post office, you would have to come up to Minton, hang a left, and then you would have to turn left into that southern USPS driveway along Minton Road. And why you would be able to do that, so there isn't a median opening now, but as a part of the R-cut or restricted crossing U-turn concept down at Henry, or down at Milwaukee, we would be able to add another opening here for that driveway to facilitate that movement. So we'd be able to kind of combine the two alternatives to help facilitate access and maintain that access to the U.S. Postal Service property. And so exiting, really not much. There are differences. You won't be able to make the left out from that driveway that's along Henry, but you would be able to come out of the driveway that's down south on Minton. That would be signalized now, or it would be signalized as a part of the R-cut concept at Milwaukee. And then you would be able to either go north, you turn right, go north on Minton, turn left on Henry, or make the U-turn to go south, back down Minton. And then the last two of our study intersections, ones that we're going to be taking a look at, Helen Street. So this one didn't really have many operational issues from a vehicular perspective. We think that we can enhance the pedestrian and bicycle facilities at this location, really place an emphasis there as well. And then, as most of you probably know, US 192 underwent some major renovations, a little bit of a facelift a few years ago. And so it was under construction for a while, added a bunch of turn lanes. And so that intersection, we're not going to go back in and touch it. So there was a lot of work that was done, a lot of money put into that. And so we're going to kind of leave that one alone and let it ride its course. And I'm going to pass it back over to Sarah.
All right. Thank you, Travis, for providing that project overview and the information on the potential improvements along Minton Road. So for more information and to further review the proposed improvements, please visit the Virtual Project Guide website at www.mintonroadstudy.com. Once on the website, you can walk through various stations, as we're calling them, similar to how you would have stations at a public workshop. So you can go to the various stations or pages to learn further about the study process, view the maps and graphics that some of them were shown tonight. Others, there are more maps and graphics included on the website. You can further look at and evaluate the different improvements that we discussed. There's also a R-cut video if you were wanting to understand the R-cut a little bit more. Also, don't forget to sign in on the welcome station if you would like to be kept up to date for future Minton Road public meetings. To navigate the website, you can either use the menu at the top of the website, or at the bottom of each station page, you can just click to the next station. So it's made to essentially take you from station 1, 2, 3, 4, and on. Finally, the last station is casting your vote. So please cast your vote by September 14th. Basically, you can fill out a form right there. Let us know which improvements that you would like to see from our presentation today. You can even say, leave it the same. There's also a blank comment section at the bottom of the survey for you to provide any other additional comments. Once again, the website is www.mintonroadstudy.com. And that is live now, so you can start sharing it with your friends and neighbors and start telling us what you want to see out on Minton. Before we do our Q&A, we do have a couple more survey questions using Mentimeter. Once again, using a computer, tablet, or cellular device, please go to Menti, MENTI.com using a computer, tablet, or cell phone and enter the code 2412774. If you were previously logged into Menti, you should still be logged in. Let me hop over to our Menti questions. So we just have a couple of them. So the first one is, do you plan to visit the project website? And we'll just give that a couple minutes. All right. Next one is, please select your age range. So we're just going to have a couple demographic questions to get a judge of what our demographics were today. Right. Please select your ethnicity. Now you don't have to answer. You can always say prefer not to answer. Right. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, how would you rank the virtual format overall? So our presentation tonight, and if you've had an opportunity to start looking at the website, you understand there can sometimes be technical difficulties. Right. And I believe this is our last question before we open up to Q&A. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, how informative did you find tonight's webinar? Actually, we had one more that we'll just kind of leave up while we go through Q&A. So you can be, if you would like to tell us anything specific that could help us improve virtual meetings in the future, you can enter that while we go through Q&A in our last 12 minutes of our time this evening. So I would like to turn it over to Laura to let us know what questions we had come in on GoTo.
Okay, the first question we have was inquiring about how the cycle track would cross over from the west to the east.
Perfect. I guess I need to go back on my webcam here, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Awesome. Well, I appreciate the question. So that's something, it's a very interesting topic because it's not done, or it's a great question because it's not done a whole lot. Typically from the installations that I've seen, the cycle track is really on one side of the road for really the majority of it, just to provide that consistency and also from a driver expectation standpoint. I think we're going to have to get pretty creative with how we do that. And I think it ties back to the pedestrian and bicycle facility enhancements that we would do at Wingate. So Wingate's really your critical point. That's where, a lot of your pedestrian and bicycle traffic is coming through to go to the school, both from the school children standpoint and from just the overall pedestrian bicycle standpoint. You also have the park on the west side as well. And so I don't have the specific answer on how it would happen or what the geometry would look like or what enhancements it would need. But I do know that it would converge at Wingate, and we would have to do some pretty significant pedestrian bicycle safety improvements to that intersection to make sure that we're getting folks across safely that are using the cycle track on the west, that are going from the west side over to the east side. Great question.
Okay, we have a gentleman, Mr. Lucas, who has had his hand raised. I'd like to call on him to unmute, and he would have an opportunity to then ask his question. Mr. Lucas, are you still online? If not, the other one would be Conroy Jacobs, has also had his hand raised. Conroy, you've been unmuted. Please let us know if you have a question.
Thank you, Laura. I'm still here. You might hear my almost 2-year-old in the background. But great presentation. I'm excited to see the study going forward. And I have 2 questions for Travis. In looking at this study and the presentation, I didn't really see much mention of the context classification. Maybe I missed it. And the land use. I understand that the city of Melbourne had vision for that corridor, or in the adjacent area, being somewhat of a, more of a downtown. I don't really want to say downtown, but more densely developed with commercial and possibly medium or high density residential land uses. So I'm curious about that. I'll ask the first question and allow you to answer, and then I'll get on to the second question. I'm curious about that because, I think going forward with the alternatives, I think the land use is an integral aspect when we're planning for corridors, especially going forward in the future, that we'd want to see what they have in mind and how it will fit into context. I can't really vote on a context without knowing what the future plans are for land use in the area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been something where, they have a few locations where West Melbourne is looking to potentially do kind of town center ideas. And so what we're looking at with each of these alternatives is really how do we connect all these different areas and all these different land uses along the corridor. And as probably most people know, it's very heavy commercial. There is some residential that's kind of offset back, a little ways off the corridor. But for that more kind of higher density, either commercial, residential, that definitely plays a factor into what roadway alternatives we're looking at. And so as I mentioned towards the beginning, the 4 to 6 lane widening concept, right? That was really why the whole study was brought up in the first place, is do we need to widen to 6 lanes? And as we were discussing that context, as we were discussing what we want the corridor to look like, or what does the city want the corridor to look like, we realized that going to 6 lanes really isn't conducive to facilitating those land uses, really kind of facilitating those ped and bike movements, and really kind of enhancing the corridor for what they wanted it to be. And so that's why we stuck with those alternatives that really emphasized, the bicycle movements, the pedestrian movements. When you're getting into the cycle track specifically, that's really targeting those different kind of potential town center areas that are along Minton Road and connecting those. And so really, we had, context class, we had future land use, that was really at the forefront of our mind during kind of that whole, engagement process with the city of West Melbourne, and then looking at our different alternatives that we had along the corridor.
Awesome. So I'm happy to hear that. So what I gather is this, the city still has the town center vision in the area. So therefore, if the speeds in that area were to remain at the 45 mile per hour, which is somewhat high speed for a local corridor, then of course that will influence support for whatever alternatives. Being protected bike lane would definitely be preferred versus a buffered bike lane based on the latest bike and ped guideline. So thank you for answering that question. The other one I had in, and I didn't know it was included in the scope, but I'm excited that you brought it up, was the Palm Bay Road intersection, and you also brought up the Emerson Road intersection. I do remember that safety study and some of the recommendations, particularly when you're heading westbound on Palm Bay Road, and when you get to that intersection at Minton, where I do remember that there was that recommendation in there for the right turn lane to change its purpose to accommodate the through traffic that's going across to the 7-Eleven and the plaza on the west side there, to be dual right turn and a through lane. We have not experienced that change as yet. I'm a local. That's how I access West Melbourne, to go dining or shopping or whatnot, but still hasn't changed, and that lane is very heavily underutilized. Mm-hmm. So I'm just echoing those comments that, to the powers may be, it's a straightforward striping and sign change could possibly get that done. So I definitely want to see that happen. You mentioned additional study for the Emerson intersection and the Palm Bay Road intersection, but I'm just curious as to what prompted additional review, since we have not yet implemented any of the improvements from the safety study.
Well, yeah, so what that kind of goes back to, Conroy, is the different intentions of the study. And so the road safety audit that was done really was focused on safety. So it was strictly looking at crashes. It was looking at how to enhance ped bike safety and vehicular safety. When we got into our corridor, when we got into this study, we were looking at everything. So we were looking at safety and operations. And we realized that, we needed to do more than just look at safety improvements. And we think it's that there needs to be kind of an operational analysis done for how all those movements interact between Emerson, Minton, and Palm Bay Road, and really kind of bundle all that together, more or less. And so, we're starting with the low-hanging fruit, which is hopefully the road safety audit recommendations. We'll get those put into this study and into this concept, and it's going to tie to whatever roadway typical section that we have that's going to start north of Palm Bay as well. So kind of keep that in mind. And then what we're hoping is that follow-up study will identify, maybe the longer term, hopefully a nearer term, implementation for whatever, the operational issues that are kind of going on in that area. So.
Okay, I'd like to move on. We're getting quite a few questions in here. Mr. Lucas, I see that you've been able to unmute your mic. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I'm just taking this all in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There was a question asked that there appeared to be an emphasis placed more on bicycle movement as opposed to traffic flow. How are we balancing the needs of improving our turn lanes? And has a survey been done to see how many bikers use Minton?
That's a great question. I'll take the second one. And then Travis, if you would like to discuss traffic flow. So as far as the number of bikers using Minton is, we have a couple different kind of sets of data or experiences that we can base off that to show that Minton is being used by bicyclists. So one, we have conducted field reviews where we've spent literally the entirety of the day from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. out on the corridor and observing what is happening. We also conduct school travel surveys every single year. And whether it's a parent survey or a student survey, we alternate. And that's able to show us the data of the students that are utilizing Minton Road for walking and biking when we can look at those specific elementary and middle schools that are within the corridor. So there definitely we do have data that shows that, and experiences that show that Minton is being used by bicyclists and pedestrians. It definitely is, more of the emphasis of the school children than just general movements. But who's to say that if you improve it, it's one of those chicken and eggs. If we build it, will they come, or do they not want to be there?
Yeah, so I think to answer the first part of the question, I think the vehicular focus would have been widening to 6 lanes. And since that got taken off the table, what we transitioned to from a vehicular standpoint was looking at our intersections. And so all of those intersection improvements that you saw tonight, where we're adding turn lanes, where we're looking at potentially doing the R-cut at Milwaukee, those all facilitate vehicular movements. And with really an emphasis on vehicular movements. When we're weighing that, weighing that as opposed to bicyclists, we're not really doing that. We're really looking at it as a whole system. And so we're saying, okay, whatever, kind of turn lane improvements that we're making, that'll help facilitate the vehicular side, to help improve safety, improve operations. But then what we do from the roadways perspective, where we're either adding bike lanes in the road, or we're doing the shared use path or the protected bike lanes or the cycle track, those are all targeting bicycle facility enhancements. And so, it's really not an either or. It's not, oh yeah, well, if you're going to improve bicycles, you're going to hurt cars, or if you improve cars, you're going to hurt bikes. We're hoping to improve both of them together and kind of a harmony system, I guess, for lack of a better term. So looking at all of it together.
Okay. Next question is on the R-cut design. Will there be pedestrian refuge islands in the center of the roadway on those diagonal crossings? Yes,
absolutely. That is the one key design feature with that, so that we can provide that refuge. We're hoping that the pedestrian theoretically should be able to cross the whole road at one time, so they wouldn't need to use the refuge. But we know that folks, it's Florida. I know that sometimes people are sitting at signals for a while, and so we know that if folks, they'll walk out in the median, they'll stand in the median. But we're hoping, we'll provide that refuge and be able to facilitate those movements.
Okay. There's a question about drainage. Yes, Sarah.
This will be our last question from GoTo, because we do have one more question that's coming in from Facebook, and then we need to wrap up.
Okay, and what I would like to also point out, there are many other questions on here. If we have not responded to you, we will be probably typing these up and maybe posting them on the website so we can respond to you at an appropriate time. Drainage was listed as an expensive component. Has low impact development options been considered?
Well, your low impact options are do nothing. Unfortunately, with how this corridor is set up, because you have the open drainage to the outside, any impacts that you have to that outside, what I was calling swale, you're going to incur drainage impacts. The level of drainage impacts will depend on the alternative. So if you just pave a little bit more pavement, it's going to have a lesser impact to the drainage facilities than if you went and tried to build your cycle track or protected bike lanes on the outside. So that's something that we're going to be exploring a little bit further. And there may be alternatives where in most of the alternatives I showed, we were adding curb and gutter to the outside to help enclose the roadway. There may be alternatives where we do not do curb and gutter and we leave it all open as well. And so there's a lot of kind of moving pieces with the drainage. Definitely we're looking at trying to minimize those options, because as soon as you start touching drainage, your cost goes up pretty significantly. And so we're exploring all of our options to try to minimize our drainage impacts as much as possible.
So as Laura mentioned, we will take all the other questions that we are receiving via GoTo, and we can answer them and post that on, and on one of the project websites. And so we do have one question that came in on our Facebook Live. So Stephen, what's our question?
Our question is from Mr. Frank Kramer. He's concerned about the Henry Avenue intersection. He says that recently some work has already been done out there, and he's worried about that the work that has been done out there already will be messed up as part of this project.
Okay.
So that's a great concern. We are coordinating with the city through every step of the way. And so, they have discussed some of the improvements that were made there, and we're trying to coordinate and make it work. So thanks. Thank you, Mr. Kramer. All right. So we definitely have a lot of follow-up items and a lot of great feedback, and we're super excited to see what you think of the website, as well as also for you to provide your input through casting your vote there and providing more comments. As always, you can contact myself at 321-690-6890, or you can email me at sarah.crom@brevardcounty.gov, or excuse me, brevardfl.gov. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us this Wednesday evening, and please don't forget to visit the website at www.mintonroadstudy.com. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.